Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on quite a literary experience, one that's generated a reaction unlike almost any other recently.
Hmm.
We're analyzing a book that's somehow both celebrated as this, modern masterpiece, a huge emotional triumph.
Right. Universally in some
And,
circles.
and at the exact same time, it gets called things like unbearable, shattering,
Mm,
a book that demands just an impossible amount of emotional stamina from you.
yeah, we are definitely talking about Yanagihara's A Little Life,
Yep.
the 2015 novel.
That's the one.
And it really is a text that requires a massive psychological investment, time investment too, from anyone who picks it up.
No play.
And our sources for this, the critical reviews, literary analyses, even psychological takes, they all hammer home that intensity.
Yeah, that's our mission here.
Well, our mission for this deep dive is basically to give you the essential map, right, to navigate this emotional landscape. We're looking at how the sources unpack the novel's, well, relentless exploration of trauma.
Relentless is the word.
It's a complex study of the limits of love, even unconditional love, and this profound idea of human endurance, not just for the characters, but, for you, the reader, too.
Exactly. And what makes it so fascinating, I think, is how it starts out. The initial structure feels almost deceptive, familiar, anyway.
How so?
It kicks off with the story of four ambitious college friends. They move to New York City, ready to start their adult lives. Standard setup, almost.
Okay, yeah.
But that framework, which kind of promises this big, sprawling, decades-long friendship saga, it changes pretty quickly. It evolves into this deeply intimate, almost surgical focus on just one character, Jude St. Francis,
Right.
and his horrifying hidden past that just defines everything.
It's like the ultimate narrative pivot, isn't it?
Yeah.
A kind of structural sleight of hand. It turns the book from what seems like a conventional ensemble drama
Yeah.
into this singular, incredibly intense character study.
Right.
And that pivot is what really sets the tone, that demanding, relentless tone for the next, 700 pages?
Yeah, exactly. So we need to understand not just that the shift happens, but maybe why Yanagihara chose to narrow that lens so well, so brutally.
It's a good point.
So let's unpack this. The sources seem to suggest the brilliance of the opening is setting up this classic scenario, the ambitious quartet, before just destabilizing everything.
Right.
Let's start with those central figures, the ones anchoring the narrative, and how the sources lay out that initial landscape before the unavoidable gravitational shift happens.
Okay, so we meet these four young guys. They find each other at a small college in Massachusetts, and they all move together to New York City, chasing success, basically.
On the surface, they seem to represent different paths, right? Different kinds of ambition.
Exactly. You've got Jude St. Francis first. He becomes this exceptionally brilliant lawyer,
Yeah.
maybe a bit guarded.
A bit, yeah. Even from the start, he's the quietest, maybe the most brilliant, but already kind of emotionally distant. You instantly feel he's the sender, but the sources confirm, yeah, his history. Total black box for a long, long time.
Then there's Willem Ragnarsson. He's sort of the kind-hearted counterpoint to Jude's darkness. The aspiring actor. He brings the warmth, the emotional availability.
He feels like the main foil, maybe the emotional safety net in those early chapters.
Definitely. Then J.B. Marion. He's the artist. Intensely ambitious, sometimes pretty volatile. He's grappling with race, identity, trying to make it in the art world.
He can be critical, abrasive even, but there's a deep loyalty there too, in his own maybe complicated way.
And finally, Malcolm Irvine, the
Mhm.
architect.
Yeah.
Malcolm comes from a more stable, privileged background. In a way, he's the closest thing to, normalcy in the group.
Right. His story focuses more on creative success, building a family within the city, kind of the traditional markers.
Yeah. So the sources are pretty clear that the initial draw, the hook, is rooted in those relatable challenges of early adulthood.
Totally. You're pulled in expecting stories about careers taking off or not, maybe addiction struggles, identity crises, the complexity of keeping those intense college friendships going over decades in a city like New York.
It feels like classic New York literary fiction at the start.
Exactly.
And that's precisely the strategic narrative bait the sources point to. It starts broad, suggesting this multi-perspective story of adult life, where everyone's struggles are kind of equally important.
But they're not, are they?
Not really. If you look closely, even early on, at the emotional weight, the sheer number of pages focused on each person. The pivot towards Jude is, it's preordained.
Yeah.
One critic actually said Yanagihara uses the friendship trope almost like a frame, just to hold this incredibly focused portrait of catastrophic suffering.
And it creeps in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Subtly at first. Jude's resistance to intimacy, his silence about where he came from, and that visible physical pain he never explains.
Right. And the sources confirm, well, yeah, GB struggles with addiction and envy, Willem with his acting career, Malcolm with creative compromises. All of those storylines, though detailed, they just become secondary.
They all orbit Jude.
Exactly. Jude's profound hidden pain becomes what the sources call the gravitational center of the whole novel's universe.
That's a good way to put it.
And this pain, it doesn't just affect him. It defines, it alters, sometimes it catastrophically fractures every single relationship he has.
So the other three, successful and complex as they are, they end up functioning less as independent characters sharing the stage.
And more like orbiting bodies, yeah. Struggling to just maintain a trajectory around Jude's singular, deeply damaged core.
It's a really remarkable narrative choice, and one the sources definitely debate, like why set up a quartet if you're going to pour, 80% of the emotional energy into one member?
Well, one analysis suggested it was actually to maximize the tragedy.
How so?
By showing Jude surrounded by so much potential happiness, so much love, the sheer power of his internal despair is just magnified. It hits harder.
Okay. That makes sense. It establishes that conflict between external reality and internal perception.
Exactly. The world sees a successful, handsome, brilliant lawyer, but the reader. We get access to the man inside who constantly feels, fundamentally broken, derelict even.
And that gap, that distance between the outer success and the inner reality, that's what fuels the whole relentless emotional engine of the book.
Precisely. Which brings us right to the core of the novel.
Yeah.
And the source material's most intense and often most contested sections.
Yeah.
The life and the trauma of Jude St. Francis himself.
Right. Let's get into that haunting endurance of his trauma.
So Jude, he's introduced as this enigma wrapped in achievement, right? Hugely successful lawyer, dedicated to pro bono work, deeply compassionate professionally.
But completely unknowable to the people who love him most.
Utterly. The sources keep identifying that the central mystery isn't really who he is, but what happened to him. And that enigma is held together by this deep, almost pathological secrecy about his past.
And when those layers finally get peeled back, and it's an excruciating process, hundreds of pages, flashbacks disrupting the main story, you, the reader, are just exposed to this horrifying catalog of systematic suffering. The sources are really clear. This isn't just hinted at trauma. It's brutally, sometimes explicitly detailed.
Yeah, the source material is unsparing on the scope of the abuse.
Right.
It's relentless physical, emotional, sexual abuse, starting practically in infancy.
It's hard to even talk about.
It is. The specific horrors mentioned in the sources, and this is what makes the book so demanding, include exploitation by monks, people in positions of trust, being trafficked, and then later, repeated violations by men who pretended to care for him, who offered paternal compassion, just the ultimate betrayal.
And that level of graphic, systematic detail, that's what makes the book so controversial, isn't it? What makes sources call it unbearable for a lot of readers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yanagihara doesn't give you the comfort of illusion. She forces you, the reader, to witness the relentless compounding of this darkness.
Okay, so here's the key point, the analysis stress, right? This isn't trauma that happened, was survived, and is now just a scar.
No, not at all. The sources argue the adult manifestation of this trauma defines his entire existence. He might be this brilliant lawyer, successful, intelligent, but he is perpetually consumed by just profound guilt and intense self-loathing. He internalizes the abuse, not as something done to him, but as proof of his own inherent worthlessness.
So the analysis suggests his physical pain, the chronic stuff, it acts as this direct, ongoing metaphor for the emotional agony.
Exactly. The chronic pain from old injuries, the hospital stays, the difficulty walking.
Yeah.
These aren't just footnotes about his past. They're described in the sources as a continuous, living mirror of the mental suffering he can't escape.
The body keeps the score, like they say.
And in Jude's case, the score is always, always due. It's a crucial thematic link.
And his coping mechanisms.
The sources dive deep into those. Secrecy, obviously, which prevents anyone from really helping, and chronic self-harm.
Which is analyzed how, not just cries for help.
No, the analysis suggests it's his primary way of punishing himself, of manifesting that internal shame externally. It's described as almost ritualistic, desperate attempts by someone whose self-perception is just entirely dictated by the violence done to him. He genuinely believes he deserves nothing but pain.
Okay, let's connect those dots further. Because this is where the themes get really complex, and the sources show the novel's tragic core. The success of the lawyer, the ambition, the career, defending others, it's all rendered meaningless.
Totally meaningless
Yeah.
because it cannot overcome the self-perception of the victim inside.
Right.
And what's fascinating and maybe radical here is the novel's refusal to offer that simple, comforting story arc of trauma conquered through achievement.
Yeah, you don't get that payoff.
No.
Yeah.
Instead, the trauma is shown as this ongoing living condition, like a pervasive atmosphere he breathes, rather than some past event he can just move beyond. One essay called it the perpetual present of trauma.
Wow.
Jude's inner dialogue is just constantly looping back to the idea that he deserves pain,
Right.
that he's defective no matter what his external life looks like or how much love he receives.
And because the novel spans decades, it really hammers home that idea of endurance over just survival.
Exactly. The sources confirm he doesn't just survive the initial abuse. He has to endure the continuous, relentless psychological fallout every single day. It dictates every interaction, isolates him, even within his success. It's the endurance of the unhealed self.
The sources also talk about his career, right? His dedication to justice as a lawyer.
Yes, analyzed as this necessary but ultimately insufficient defense mechanism. He fights so fiercely for others, the victims, the downtrodden, because he can't fight for himself.
That's like a displacement.
A desperate displacement of his self-worth onto strangers, hoping maybe if he can save them, he might somehow earn his own right to exist, or at least distract himself from his own pain. It doesn't work, ultimately.
Which, given that harrowing internal world, makes the role of his friends, that chosen family, absolutely vital, but also complicated.
Incredibly complicated. Which brings us to Section 3, found family, and crucially, the limits of healing.
Right, because the sources are quick to point out, despite everything, Jude is surrounded by friends who love him deeply, and yet,
They fail to save him.
yes. And these relationships, they function as the only real source of light, stability, grace in the whole narrative.
They show the capacity for human connection, loyalty, care.
Immense capacity. The sources spend a lot of time analyzing this network, arguing, actually, that the friends are the book's primary moral agents. They represent the good.
Okay, let's look closer at those dynamics. Willem Ragnarsson first, because his role feels foundational.
Absolutely. The sources highlight him as the kind, incredibly loyal, closest companion. Eventually, Jude's romantic partner. He's the anchor, the one who just relentlessly tries to understand the unknowable parts of Jude.
He represents unconditional acceptance, maybe.
He does. And the critical analysis suggests Villen's background, successful actor, warm, empathetic, makes him kind of the ideal person to shoulder this immense burden of caring for Jude.
But the sources also stress the cost, right? The cost of that care for Willem himself. Oh, absolutely. Willem is constantly forced into being the caretaker, the confidant, the witness to Jude's self-destruction. It fundamentally changes his own life's path. His love is profound, yes, but also profoundly exhausting.
And the other friends are key, too, in defining this found family structure. J.B. Marion, the artist, he's a counterpoint.
A crucial one. Sources detail JB's own significant struggles, that intense ambition, his jealousy of Willem's success, even jealousy of Jude's position as the group's sort of damaged center.
And his addiction issues.
Right, his descent into addiction. JB's journey is vital because he's maybe the only one with a self-destructive impulse that kind of rivals Jude's, though it's fueled by ego and addiction, not trauma.
His betrayal of Jude, that's a low point. Using Jude's suffering for his art.
That's analyzed as the moment of deepest fracture
Yeah.
in the group, yeah. But his eventual recovery, his ability to relate to Jude through their shared, albeit different brokenness, it offers this flawed but essential connection later. He gets the shame, even if he doesn't get the source of Jude's.
And then Malcolm Irvine, the architect. How do the sources see him?
Often positioned as the representative of this stable, maybe privileged, outsider looking in. His attempts to help Jude are always well-meaning, but they often miss the mark.
Highlighting the gap.
Yeah, highlighting the chasm between someone who can approach problems logically and someone governed by these deep psychological demons.
And we also have Harold, Jude's adoptive father.
Yes, Malcolm and his wife, Sophie, and especially Harold, complete that structure. Harold is cited everywhere as the embodiment of restorative paternal love. He just accepts Jude's darkness without judgment.
So the whole chosen family unit, its function is to offer these moments of grace and belonging.
Exactly, to prove that connection can exist, that it tries to mitigate overwhelming suffering through shared life, through just being there.
It sounds like the ideal version of friendship, of chosen family love. But here's the twist, right? the really provocative part, where the sources stress that devastatingly important distinction.
This is the critical so what of the
Yeah.
whole thing, yeah.
The sources seem to debate this. Is Yanagihara being brutally realistic here, or just unnecessarily cruel?
It raises that crucial question. The novel makes a very deliberate structural point, not to romanticize all this incredible unconditional love as some kind of cure-all.
Right. It doesn't fix him.
No. While the love from Willem, Harold, J.B., Malcolm is profound, it surrounds him, it sustains him, the sources are crystal clear. The novel acknowledges the limits of what others can heal.
And that's maybe the hardest truth in the book.
One recurring critique definitely noted that, because in so many stories, love is the answer, right? It's the solvent for past pain. Yagihara just radically rejects that.
Why, according to the analysis?
Because the psychological wounds run too deep. They're woven into the very fabric of Jude's identity, his sense of self. Love can provide safety, sure, but it can't fundamentally dismantle that internalized shame telling Jude he's unworthy of safety.
So the support system offers comfort, stability.
But they can't reach the core psychological damage that keeps forcing him back into self-destruction. They can't get inside his head and rewrite the script.
Okay, but that leads to a debate in the critiques, doesn't it? Does this refusal to offer a cure make the book feel hopeless? Or is it delivering a necessary, brutal realism about deep, complex trauma?
That's the central tension.
And what about the structure, the idea that Willem and Malcolm become orbiters? Did the sources see that as successful or a failure? Did it minimize their lives too much?
The majority view in the sources seems to be that it was deliberate and necessary. By structurally minimizing the others, Yanagihara actually heightens the tragedy of Jude's isolation.
How so?
Well, if Willem and Malcolm had fully independent, equally weighted stories, the narrative might risk suggesting Jude's pain is just, one problem among many.
Okay.
By making them orbiters, they become witnesses. And their failure to save Jude becomes a commentary on the limits of human intervention itself, not just their personal failure.
So the fracturing effect is inevitable. It's central to the theme.
Absolutely. The sources reiterate, while the love is profound, constant even, Jude's pain is so intense it inevitably breaks the group dynamic sometimes. It highlights the intense difficulty, the sheer exhaustion of loving someone who fundamentally cannot love themselves.
They become, what was the phrase? Collateral damage.
Collateral damage to a civil war fought within one man's mind.
Yeah.
They're forced to endure these agonizing cycles of hope, then relapse. They witness his inability to accept happiness, to feel safe.
And that inability to be saved, or maybe his refusal to allow himself to be saved, that's the deepest tragedy.
Perhaps it underscores the profound isolation that trauma enforces. And it highlights the huge emotional burden on the caregivers, the compassionate observers. The novel doesn't just show Jude's suffering, it shows the price paid by those who love him.
Okay, so we've covered the story, the trauma, the relationships, but now we need to get to the how. The sources suggest the engine driving this unforgettable impact isn't just the suffering itself.
No, it's the way Yanagihara wields language.
Right. So moving to section 4, style, symbolism, and that unforgettable impact. What makes this book such a cultural phenomenon?
Well, Yanagihara's prose, according to pretty much all the sources, is incredibly distinctive. It's described as lush, lyrical, and devastatingly intimate.
Lush and lyrical, but also
surgically brutal. She uses language that can be soaringly beautiful when describing moments of joy between the friends, shared happiness, and then turn on a dime to dissect Jude's inner life with just unflinching, brutal honesty. That contrast is absolutely key. The beauty makes the brutality almost harder to bear.
It's that forced intimacy, isn't it? That's what makes it so exhausting for you as the reader.
Exactly. The style, critics note, is brutally honest. It actively avoids giving you narrative comfort, closure, or distance.
And the structure contributes too, the non-linear timeline.
Hugely. The sources point out the narrative structure is highly nonlinear, frequent, often unexpected jumps in time. This reinforces the feeling that trauma isn't progressive, it's cyclical.
The past is never past.
It's always rushing into the present. That nonlinearity is a deliberate technique. It denies you, the reader, that sense of chronological progression towards healing. Just when you think Jude might be stable, bam! The narrative jumps back to a moment of abuse.
Reminding you that for him, those moments are never really over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book's explicit depictions of trauma, of self-harm, which the sources detail, they are the core of its impact. Acknowledging, yes, this makes the book emotionally exhausting, deeply distressing.
And the sources really emphasize this is the part that makes it not for everyone.
Definitely. The author isn't interested in providing relief or easy catharsis. She wants to give you this deeply sustained portrait of reality, as Jude, the victim, perceives it. That lack of relief is entirely intentional.
Okay, so let's go deeper into the core themes the sources identify. Obviously, the nature of trauma itself, not just as an event.
But as a permanent state, yeah. Something that permanently reshapes your sense of self, turns your own mind into a battleground.
And related to that, the theme of memory as a prison.
hmm Sources analyze how the past becomes both a prison and, weirdly, a companion for Jude. His memories aren't faded pictures. They're constantly present, informing every decision, actively stopping him from fully living his adult life.
He can't escape the voices of his abusers.
Because they've literally become his own internal monologue. That's the analysis.
There's also that tension between suffering and survival, endurance, really.
Right. The book forces the question, how much pain can one person bear and still function? And maybe more pointedly, how long can the people who love him bear witness without breaking themselves?
It elevates endurance from just hanging on.
To an active, almost self-destructive way of life for Jude.
Yeah. Which brings us back to that title, A Little Life. It feels so paradoxical for a book this long, this epic in its suffering.
Totally. It's intentionally paradoxical. And this is where the literary analysis really gets interesting.
What do the sources say it means?
They note it's profoundly bittersweet, multivalent. It could be a reference to the smallness of individual existence when set against these huge impersonal forces of trauma and cruelty.
Okay, like one life is small in the grand scheme.
Right. But on another level, sources interpret it as the smallness of Jude's available life, the life he's actually allowed to live because of the trauma.
Ah, so his focus is narrowed just to managing the pain.
Exactly, leaving only this little emotional capacity left for everything else: joy, career, love. It shrinks his world.
It also seems to anchor that tragic idea that even a life with huge success, profound love, it can still be ultimately defined by private agony.
Yeah, the scope of his internal suffering just dwarfs his external achievements.
Yeah.
It's an ironic title that says so much about the gap between a potentially full life and one truncated by trauma.
So the final assessment from the sources, how do they ultimately judge the work?
Consistently called a masterpiece of emotional intensity, a portrait of endurance, but always with a caveat
Which is?
that the book fundamentally tests your empathy as a reader.
Tests it how? To destruction.
Pretty much. The test is whether you can withstand that prolonged, sustained exposure to unrelenting despair, the cycles of abuse and self-harm, without just turning away. Closing the book.
But if you do endure it,
For those who make it through the emotional gauntlet, the sources promise you're left shattered, yet somehow enlightened by its humanity.
enlightened how? Not through a happy ending, clearly.
No, the enlightenment comes from witnessing the full, exhausting spectrum of human capability for profound cruelty, yes, but also for profound selfless love. It's an enlightenment built on bearing witness.
Okay. So this deep dive into the source material really gives you that clear emotional and structural map of the novel, doesn't it?
I think so.
We've looked at the shift from friendship story to intense character study, analyzed how Jude's trauma isn't just past, it's a living condition.
And explored those ultimate limits of even the deepest love to provide a cure.
Right. So you understand now why the book is so celebrated for its depth, but also why it's so controversial for its brutality, its relentless emotional demands.
It acts as a necessary shortcut, maybe, informing you of the thematic priorities and the intense investment required if you decide to pick it up. We've moved past just 4 friends in New York.
Definitely past that. It's a psychological study of enduring catastrophe.
Yeah.
And now, as we wrap up this pretty complex discussion, we want to leave you with one final thought, something building on that central tension of the novel.
Okay.
If our sources confirm that this book tests your empathy, the reader's empathy, right to its breaking point, maybe the final question isn't really about Jude. Maybe it's about us.
What do you mean?
Do we read books like this purely for some kind of catharsis in witnessing pain from a safe distance? Or is the ultimate endurance test here actually a measure of our own capacity? Our capacity to stay engaged with profound suffering when we know going in there's no conventional happy ending promised?
That's a heavy question. It forces us to ask, if this fictional portrayal of trauma challenges us so deeply, what's our responsibility when we face that kind of reality in the world off the page? And maybe, just maybe, the true purpose of A Little Life isn't meant to be about healing at all. Maybe it's just to force us to acknowledge the existence of pain that simply cannot be healed by love alone.
A difficult thought to end on, but maybe a necessary one. Thank you for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the difficult but undeniably brilliant world of a little life.
We'll see you next time.